Cronus. Cronus was the youngest of the Titans, the powerful children of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. Unlike some of his siblings, he wasn't content to simply exist under his father's rule. Cronus was ambitious, and his story is one of rebellion, power, and ultimately paranoia. Uranus had filled the world with children, but he hated some of them, especially the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed giants. He feared their strength and cast them deep into Tartarus, the dark abyss beneath the earth. Gaia, heartbroken and furious at seeing her children imprisoned, asked the Titans for help. She forged a great stone sickle and begged them to rise up against their father. Most were too afraid, but Cronus agreed. When Uranus came to lie with Gaia, Cronus ambushed him. With the sickle, he castrated his father and threw the severed pieces into the sea. From the foam, the goddess Aphrodite would later be born. Uranus was dethroned, and Cronus took power. He declared himself ruler of the cosmos and chose his sister Rhea as his queen. For a time, his reign seemed ideal. This was remembered as the Golden Age, when people lived in harmony without laws, war, or hard labor. The world was abundant, and mortals didn't suffer hunger or toil. Under Cronus, life was simple and peaceful, but that peace was fragile. Before Uranus fell, he had cursed his son, warning that one day Cronus would be overthrown by his own child, just as he had overthrown his father. That prophecy haunted Cronus. He had tasted power and was determined to keep it. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, Hestia, Cronus acted immediately. To prevent the prophecy, he swallowed the baby whole. He did the same with Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. One after another, his children disappeared into his stomach. Rhea, devastated, begged him to stop, but his paranoia only grew stronger. Each new birth meant another threat, and Cronus refused to take chances. Rhea's pain turned into resolve. When she became pregnant again, she sought Gaia's advice. Together, they devised a plan. She gave birth to her sixth child, Zeus, in secret, hiding him away in a cave on the island of Crete. In her arms, she carried a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes and presented it to Cronus. Without hesitation, he swallowed it, believing he had once again destroyed the threat. Meanwhile, Zeus was raised in secret. Some stories say he was fed by nymphs. Others say a sacred goat named Amalthea nursed him. Warriors beat their shields to drown out his cries so Cronus would never hear him. Hidden away, the child destined to fulfill the prophecy grew stronger. Cronus, unaware, continued his reign. But no matter how carefully he guarded his throne, he couldn't escape fate. Zeus matured, returned, and with the help of Gaia, gave Cronus a potion that forced him to vomit up what he had swallowed. Out came the stone, and then the 5 children, fully grown and alive. The family Cronus had tried to erase was restored, and they were ready to fight. This marked the beginning of the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and the Olympians. Cronus commanded the Titans from Mount Othrys, while Zeus and his siblings fought from Mount Olympus. The battle raged for 10 years, shaking the very foundations of the world. In the end, Cronus and the Titans were defeated. Many were cast into Tartarus, locked away as their father Uranus had once imprisoned others. Cronus, who had risen by overthrowing his father, was himself overthrown by his son. Cronus's story is a cycle: power gained through rebellion, held through fear, and lost because of that very fear. He overthrew his father to escape tyranny, but in his paranoia, he became a tyrant himself. His attempt to control fate ensured the prophecy came true. To the Greeks, Cronus symbolized both abundance and fear. He ruled over the Golden Age, a time of plenty, yet he was remembered for devouring his children, an image as horrifying as it is unforgettable. He was both the bringer of prosperity and the destroyer of family, showing how ambition without trust can corrupt even the brightest rain. Cronus reminds us of the dangers of holding power with fear instead of love. No matter how strong you are, trying to control destiny often creates the very downfall you fear. His story is tragic, not just because he lost his throne, but because he destroyed what he should have cherished most, his own children. Zeus. Hidden away as a baby, Zeus grew up knowing his destiny wasn't small. His mother Rhea secretly raised him in a cave on the island of Crete, protected from his father Cronus's hunger. Some stories even say magical nymphs fed him honey, and a goat named Amalthea gave him milk. And whenever baby Zeus cried, warriors would clash their shields together to hide the sound, so Cronus wouldn't hear him. From the very beginning, Zeus was being groomed for something epic. When Zeus grew older, Gaia, the earth herself, gave him a special potion, an emetic, to use against his father. Imagine the courage it must have taken. He walked up to the Titan, who had devoured his siblings, and forced him to drink it. Cronus doubled over, and one by one, the children he had swallowed came spilling out. First the stone he thought was Zeus, then Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. After years of being trapped, the siblings were free again. And now the balance of power had shifted. No longer was Zeus the hidden child. He was a leader, a liberator. He rallied his brothers and sisters, and together they prepared for war, the Titanomachy, one of the greatest battles in all mythology. The war raged for 10 years. On one side stood Cronus and the Titans, fighting from Mount Othrys. On the other side was Zeus and his siblings, the Olympians, fighting from Mount Olympus. And it wasn't just the family feud, we're talking cosmic forces. Zeus freed the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants, who had been locked away by Cronus. The Cyclopes, master smiths, forged weapons for the gods. Zeus's thunderbolt, Poseidon's trident, Hades' helm of invisibility. With these, the Olympians gained the edge. Picture this: thunder crashing from Zeus's hand, the earth splitting with Poseidon's trident, Hades slipping into shadows unseen, and the 100-handed giants hurling massive boulders like catapults. The sky and earth themselves shook with the fury of their clash. In the end, Zeus triumphed. The Titans were defeated and hurled into Tartarus, locked away behind unbreakable gates. Cronus, the once mighty ruler of the Golden Age, was cast down, and Zeus rose, not just as a warrior, but as king of the gods. But Zeus wasn't just about power. He was also about order. He divided the cosmos among himself and his brothers. The sky for Zeus, the sea for Poseidon, and the underworld for Hades. The earth itself, that belonged to everyone. It was a system of balance, but make no mistake, Zeus was the ultimate authority. And here's the thing, Zeus wasn't perfect, far from it. He was famous for his countless affairs, sneaking away from his wife Hera to be with goddesses, nymphs, even mortals. From these flings came many of the most famous figures in Greek mythology: Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Dionysus, and even heroes like Hercules. It's almost like Zeus couldn't stop planting the seeds of stories everywhere. But at the same time, Zeus was feared and respected. He was the god of the sky, the bringer of thunder and lightning, the one who kept both gods and mortals in line. To anger him meant disaster, storms, curses, punishment. To honor him meant protection and prosperity. Think about it. Zeus started as a baby hidden away in a cave, the child his father tried to erase. He became the leader who freed his siblings, the warrior who defeated the Titans, and the king who ruled over gods and men. His story is about resilience, rebellion, and the unshakable force of destiny. That's why, even today, Zeus is remembered not just as another myth, but as the god above all gods, the thunderbolt-wielding ruler of Olympus, Hera. If Zeus was the king of the gods, then Hera was the queen. But unlike fairy tales where queens are gentle, gracious figures standing beside their king, Hera's reputation in mythology was very different. She was the goddess of marriage, women, and family. On paper, that sounds noble and protective, like the guardian of sacred bonds. But Hera was also famous for her jealousy, her temper, and her need to keep Zeus's wild behavior in check. And honestly, with a husband like Zeus, who couldn't blame her? Zeus was infamous for his endless affairs. Goddesses, nymphs, mortal women. He pursued them all. For Hera, this wasn't just about betrayal. In ancient Greek culture, marriage and family were the foundation of society. Hera wasn't just Zeus's wife, she was the goddess of the institution itself. So every time Zeus strayed, it wasn't just personal, it was cosmic. It was like the god of storms setting fire to the sky. But Hera didn't usually take her anger out on Zeus. Instead, she often turned her wrath toward the women involved, or even their children. It's harsh, but that's what makes her such a fascinating figure. She embodied both the sanctity of marriage and the destructive fury that comes when it's broken. Take the story of Leto, one of Zeus's lovers. When Leto became pregnant with Zeus's children, the twins Apollo and Artemis, Hera was outraged. She tried to prevent Leto from giving birth at all. Imagine being so powerful that you could command the spirits of nature to refuse a woman a place to deliver her children. That's exactly what Hera did. She forbade every land and island from offering Leto refuge. But eventually, Poseidon, Zeus's brother, took pity and guided Leto to a floating island where she could finally give birth. Despite Hera's efforts, Apollo and Artemis were born, and both became major Olympian gods. Or consider Hercules, perhaps the most famous demigod of all time. He was another illegitimate child of Zeus, and Hera absolutely despised him for it. When Hercules was just a baby, she sent 2 serpents slithering into his crib to kill him. But Hercules, even as an infant, had superhuman strength. Instead of crying, he grabbed the snakes and crushed them with his bare hands. Imagine that sight. A baby holding up 2 dead serpents like rattles. Hera's rage didn't stop there though. Later in his life, she struck Hercules with madness so severe that he killed his own wife and children. That tragedy set him on the path of the famous 12 labors, one of the most grueling journeys in Greek mythology. Stories like these show us Hera's darker side, but they also highlight her power. She wasn't a passive queen standing in Zeus's shadow. She was an active force, feared as much as she was respected. But Hera wasn't all wrath. She also represented the dignity of women, the sanctity of vows, and the importance of family. In temples across Greece, women prayed to her for blessings in marriage and childbirth. In a world where women had few rights, Hera's role as protector of wives gave her a special kind of reverence. What makes Hera so interesting is that she's not easy to pin down. She's both nurturing and vengeful, both a guardian and a punisher. She's relatable in a way. Have you ever felt betrayed, jealous, or furious at someone you love? Hera takes those very human emotions and amplifies them to godlike proportions. Hera's mythos reminds us of something simple but powerful. Love and loyalty can be sacred, but when they're broken, the fallout can be destructive. She embodies that contradiction, and that's why she remains one of the most memorable figures in the Greek pantheon, Poseidon. Poseidon was the god of the sea, and to the Greeks, that meant he was one of the most powerful and unpredictable gods of all. The ocean was vast, dangerous, and full of mysteries, and Poseidon embodied all of it. He was also called the Earth Shaker, because earthquakes were said to come from his anger. And strangely enough, he was also the god of horses, believed to have created them himself. To sailors, farmers, and warriors alike, Poseidon's presence was inescapable. He's usually pictured holding his trident, a three-pronged spear that symbolized his command over the seas. With a single strike, he could stir the calmest waters into a deadly storm, sink ships, or split the earth itself. But Poseidon wasn't only destructive. His trident could also calm the seas and bring safety to sailors. Like the ocean he ruled, his personality shifted between generosity and rage. One story that shows his temper clearly is the tale of King Minos of Crete. Minos prayed to Poseidon to send him a sign to prove he was the rightful ruler. Poseidon answered by sending a magnificent white bull rising from the sea. It was meant to be sacrificed back to the god as thanks, but Minos admired the bull so much that he kept it for himself and sacrificed a lesser one instead. Poseidon was enraged. To punish Minos, he cursed the king's wife, Persephone, to fall in love with the bull. From that unnatural union came the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull monster that haunted Crete for generations. The message was clear. Poseidon's gifts came with conditions, and ignoring them brought disaster. Poseidon also competed with other gods for influence. His most famous rivalry was with Athena over the city that became Athens. Both wanted to be its patron deity. To settle the contest, they each offered the city a gift. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and water sprang forth. But the water was salty and not useful for drinking, though it symbolized naval power and trade. Athena offered the olive tree, which gave wood, oil, and food. The people chose Athena's gift, and she became the city's protector. Poseidon, humiliated, never forgot the insult. Some myths even say he punished Athens with floods afterward. Despite these grudges, Poseidon wasn't always seen as hostile. For those who honored him, he could be a generous protector. Sailors prayed to him before voyages, hoping for calm seas and safe returns. Cities held festivals in his honor, and horse races were dedicated to him because of his connection with horses. His dual nature, protector and destroyer, was what made him so deeply respected. People feared him, but they also depended on him. What makes Poseidon especially interesting is how human his personality feels. He was quick-tempered, jealous, and prone to holding grudges, but he was also capable of loyalty and support. In stories, he often sided with Zeus and the Olympians, but he also had moments where his pride made him rebel. He wasn't simply good or bad, he was as unpredictable as the waves. To the Greeks, this made perfect sense. The sea was their lifeline, but also their greatest danger. Trade, travel, and food all came from the water, but storms could wipe everything away in an instant. Poseidon embodied that reality. He was the ocean itself, beautiful, vast, but never fully safe. When you think of Poseidon, don't just picture a god with a trident. Picture the endless horizon, the crash of waves, and the ground trembling beneath your feet. He was the reminder that some forces of nature can never be controlled, only respected. And that's why he remained one of the most powerful gods in the Greek imagination, because whether on land or at sea, his presence could be felt everywhere. Athena. When most people think of Greek gods, they picture thunderbolts, sea storms, or the dark mysteries of the underworld. But Athena, she was different. She wasn't about raw destruction or chaos. She was about intelligence, skill, and strategy. She was the goddess of wisdom, warfare, and craft. And she's one of the most admired figures in Greek mythology. Her birth story is one of the strangest and most dramatic of all. Zeus, in his endless affairs, once swallowed his lover Metis, the goddess of cunning and wisdom. Why? Because a prophecy warned that Metis would give birth to a child more powerful than its father. Zeus, terrified of being overthrown the way he had once overthrown Cronus, thought the simplest solution was to swallow her whole. But instead of solving the problem, he gave himself the worst headache in history. The pain grew so unbearable that Zeus begged Hephaestus, the smith of the gods, to split open his head with an axe. Out of Zeus's skull leapt Athena, fully grown and fully armed, with a helmet and spear in hand. Can you imagine that? Not a fragile baby, but a warrior goddess bursting out of her father's forehead. It's one of the most powerful entrances in mythology, and it set the tone for everything Athena would represent. Wisdom and strength working hand in hand. Unlike Ares, who embodied raw rage and bloodlust in battle, Athena symbolized strategy and intelligence. If Ares was the brawler in a fight, Athena was the tactician, the one who planned, thought ahead, and used skill to win. That's why so many Greek heroes, from Odysseus to Perseus, prayed to her for guidance. She was the kind of goddess you wanted on your side when brains mattered as much as brawn. One of Athena's most famous stories is her contest with Poseidon over the city of Athens. Both gods wanted to be the city's patron, so they agreed to offer gifts. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and a spring of water gushed forth. But the water was salty, and though it symbolized trade and naval power, it wasn't exactly practical for drinking. Athena, in contrast, planted the very first olive tree. Her gift was simple but profound. Olives gave food, oil, and wood, things essential for daily life. The people chose her gift, and the city became Athens, forever tied to her name. That contest tells you a lot about Athena. She wasn't flashy. She didn't rely on brute force. She offered something practical, sustainable, and wise. And that's why she became one of the most beloved deities in Greece. But Athena also had a stern side. She was fiercely protective of her temples and her honor. Take the story of Medusa. Medusa wasn't always a monster. She was once a beautiful, mortal priestess serving Athena. But Poseidon, in an act of violence, assaulted her inside Athena's temple. Instead of punishing Poseidon, Athena transformed Medusa into a gorgon. Her hair turned to snakes, and her gaze became deadly to anyone who looked into her eyes. From then on, Medusa was feared as a monster, though some see her transformation as a twisted form of protection. After all, no man could ever harm her again. Athena was also one of the 3 virgin goddesses, alongside Artemis and Hestia. She never married, never had children, and fiercely guarded her independence. To the Greeks, this symbolized her purity and her focus. She belonged to no man, and her wisdom was undivided. She wasn't just a goddess of war and wisdom, though. She was also connected to crafts and inventions, things like weaving, pottery, and metalwork. In a world where survival depended on skill, Athena represented the ingenuity that allowed humans to build, create, and thrive. If Zeus was the king of the gods, Athena was often seen as his favorite child, the one who balanced his thunderous rule with reason and clarity. She stood for the idea that power alone wasn't enough. you needed wisdom to guide it. Athena is remembered not just as a goddess, but as a symbol of intelligence, fairness, and resilience. She teaches us that victory isn't always about the strongest punch, it's about the smartest move. And that's why, thousands of years later, her image still inspires ideas of justice and wisdom around the world. Hephaestus. While gods like Zeus and Athena often seem larger than life, full of glory and triumph, Hephaestus's story is something else entirely. He's the god of fire, blacksmiths, craftsmen, and volcanoes. But unlike the glamorous Olympians, Hephaestus was the outcast, the lame god, rejected even by his own family. And yet, he's the one who forged their weapons, built their palaces, and crafted their treasures. In many ways, he was the backbone of Olympus. Hephaestus's beginnings were rough. Some myths say that when Hera, Zeus's wife, gave birth to him, she was so disgusted by his deformity, his twisted, lame legs, that she hurled him from Mount Olympus. Imagine that, your mother, the queen of the gods, throwing you away just because you weren't perfect. He fell for an entire day before, landing in the ocean, where the sea goddesses Thetis and Eurynome took pity and raised him. Other versions say Zeus threw him down after he sided with Hera in one of their many arguments. Either way, Hephaestus grew up knowing rejection and pain, but instead of giving up, he turned his suffering into skill. Living beneath volcanoes, he learned to master fire and metal. He became the greatest craftsman in the universe, forging creations no one else could imagine. His forge wasn't just a workshop, it was a place where divine power took shape in the form of weapons, armor, and inventions. Hephaestus made Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, and Hades's helm of invisibility. He crafted Achilles' near indestructible armor and even Hercules' legendary weapons. In a way, the glory of the heroes and gods wouldn't have been possible without Hephaestus working behind the scenes. He didn't fight on the battlefield, he gave others the tools to win. But his story wasn't only about creating, he also knew revenge. After being thrown away by Hera, he later sent her a beautiful golden throne as a gift. When she sat on it, she found herself trapped. It was a magical device that bound her in place. The other gods begged Hephaestus to release her, but he refused, bitter from years of rejection. Eventually, Dionysus, the god of wine, got him drunk and brought him back to Olympus. In exchange for freeing Hera, Hephaestus demanded a wife. The gods agreed, and he was wed to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. But their marriage was rocky. Aphrodite wasn't faithful. She had an affair with Ares, the god of war. Hephaestus eventually caught them in the act, trapping them in a net of unbreakable chains and dragging them before the other gods to humiliate them. Even in his pain, you can see the cleverness of the craftsman, using his skills to outsmart those who wronged him. Hephaestus also created Pandora, the first mortal woman, along with her infamous jar, often called Pandora's box. When Pandora opened it, all the world's evils were released. Though not directly his fault, it was his craftsmanship that played a role in shaping humanity's struggles. What makes Hephaestus stand out is that he wasn't perfect. He wasn't powerful, handsome, or charming like the other gods. He was flawed, disabled, and rejected, but he took what he had and turned it into greatness. He's a reminder that strength doesn't always look like muscles or thunderbolts. Sometimes it looks like resilience, creativity, and the ability to build something lasting even when the world tells you you're not enough. In that sense, Hephaestus might be one of the most human of all the gods. His story resonates because it's about overcoming rejection, finding your place, and proving your worth not through beauty or charm, but through hard work and talent. Aphrodite. Some gods were born from parents. Some were hidden in caves or swallowed whole and spit back out, But Aphrodite, her origin was one of the strangest and most poetic in all mythology. She rose from the sea itself, born from the foam, created when Cronus cast the severed genitals of Uranus into the ocean. From that violent act of rebellion came something entirely different: beauty, love, and desire. It's like the Greeks were saying, even in destruction, creation can bloom. When Maia, Aphrodite, emerged, she wasn't just another goddess. She was dazzling, irresistible, radiant in a way that no one could ignore. Wherever she went, the air seemed softer, the world brighter. Flowers bloomed in her footsteps, and waves bent to her presence. She was beauty personified, but also something deeper. She embodied love, passion, lust, and the raw force of attraction that pulls people together, often whether they want it or not. But here's the thing: Aphrodite's power wasn't always gentle. She could inspire devotion and reward those who honored her. But she could also punish brutally anyone who disrespected her. Love, after all, isn't always soft. It can be consuming, obsessive, even destructive. Though she was married to Hephaestus, the lame blacksmith of the gods, Aphrodite was anything but faithful. Her most famous affair was with Ares, the god of war. Beauty and violence, an unlikely pairing. Yet somehow it made sense. Where Ares embodied raw aggression, Aphrodite embodied the attraction that could spark passion just as easily as conflict. Together, they represented two unstoppable forces colliding. But Hephaestus wasn't oblivious. He knew what was going on, and he set a trap. Crafting an unbreakable chain-link net, he cast it over their bed. When Aphrodite and Ares lay together, they were caught in the act. Hephaestus dragged them before the other gods, humiliated and exposed. The Olympians roared with laughter, mocking the trapped lovers. It was one of the most scandalous moments on Mount Olympus. In the end, it took Poseidon's intervention to free them. This story shows both sides of Aphrodite, her irresistible magnetism and her vulnerability when caught. She wasn't perfect. She was flawed, complicated, and deeply human in her desires. But her influence spread far beyond Olympus. Mortals prayed to her for love, fertility, and beauty. They dedicated temples and held festivals in her honor, hoping to gain her favor in matters of the heart. To the Greeks, she wasn't just about romance. She was about survival. Love led to marriage, which led to children, which ensured families and cities endured. At the same time, she could be merciless. If a mortal insulted her beauty or refused to honor her, she might curse them with heartbreak, obsession, or tragedy. In this way, Aphrodite reflected the double-edged sword of love itself. It can lift you higher than anything else, but it can also bring the deepest pain. One of the most famous examples of Aphrodite's power was the Trojan War. According to legend, the entire conflict began with her. When Paris, Prince of Troy, was asked to judge which goddess was the most beautiful, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite, each goddess offered him a bribe. Hera promised power. Athena promised wisdom. But Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris chose Aphrodite, sparking the chain of events that led to Helen's abduction and the devastating war that followed. It's a reminder that beauty and desire, while intoxicating, can also ignite chaos on a massive scale. What makes Aphrodite so fascinating is that she represents both the best and worst of love. She's the goddess who gives us passion, beauty, and connection, but also jealousy, infidelity, and obsession. Her myths remind us that love is never simple. It can be divine, but it can also be dangerous. Even today, when people talk about the power of attraction, they're channeling the same energy the Greeks once saw in Aphrodite. She's not just a goddess of beauty, she's a force of nature, a reminder that love and desire are among the most powerful and unpredictable forces in existence. Ares. If Aphrodite embodied beauty and attraction, Ares was her opposite in almost every way: ugly, violent, and feared. He was the god of war, but not the noble kind. Athena represented strategy, planning, and wisdom in battle. Ares represented the bloodlust, chaos, and fury. He was war at its most brutal and terrifying. The Greeks didn't love Ares the way they loved Athena or even Poseidon. In fact, they often disliked him. He was unpredictable, destructive, and uncontrollable. Even Zeus, his own father, once admitted he hated Ares more than any other god because of his violent, reckless nature. Yet war was an unavoidable part of human life, and Ares embodied that reality. Imagine the battlefield, swords clashing, men screaming, blood staining the ground. That was Ares's domain. He wasn't about victory or justice. He was about the raw frenzy of combat, the thrill of violence for its own sake. He thrived in the chaos where reason disappeared and instinct took over. But despite his fearsome reputation, Ares wasn't invincible. In myth, he's often humiliated. In the Trojan War, for example, he fought on the side of Troy but was wounded by Diomedes, a mortal hero, with the help of Athena. Imagine that. The god of war himself, crying out in pain and fleeing back to Olympus to complain to Zeus. It shows that while he symbolized violence, he wasn't unbeatable. His love affair with Aphrodite added another layer to his character. On one hand, it made sense. Passion and violence are both intense, consuming forces. On the other, it highlighted his vulnerability. Even the god of war could be ensnared by love. When Hephaestus caught him and Aphrodite in the net, Ares became the laughingstock of Olympus. The contrast is almost comical. A god who struck fear into mortals, reduced to shame in front of his divine family. Still, Ares wasn't without followers. In some parts of Greece, especially Sparta, he was honored as a symbol of strength, courage, and valor. Warriors prayed to him before battle, hoping to channel his ferocity. For societies that valued military power, Ares represented the spirit that pushed soldiers to fight without hesitation. What makes Ares interesting is that he wasn't celebrated as a hero. He was feared, even hated, but he was necessary. War is destructive, yes, but it's also an inescapable part of human history. The Greeks recognized this, and Ares became the embodiment of that truth. He was a god they didn't want, but couldn't ignore. In a way, Ares teaches us something uncomfortable. Not all forces we rely on are noble or admirable. Sometimes, survival depends on embracing chaos and aggression, even if we don't like it. That's why he stood beside Aphrodite. Love and war, two unstoppable forces that shape human lives in equal measure. So while Athena was the war goddess you respected, Ares was the war god you feared. He wasn't about justice or wisdom. He was about rage, blood, and the primal scream of battle. And though the Greeks may not have loved him, they understood that Ares represented something real, the side of war that is savage, uncontrollable, and undeniably human. Apollo. If the gods of Olympus were a family, Apollo would be the golden child, literally golden. He was the god of light, the sun, music, prophecy, healing, and even archery. He wasn't just good at one thing, he was good at everything. He was handsome, talented, and often considered the most beautiful of all the gods. Imagine a being so radiant that wherever he walked, people couldn't help but stop and stare. That was Apollo. His birth, however, wasn't easy. His mother, Leto, was one of Zeus's many lovers. When she became pregnant, Hera, Zeus's wife, was furious. Hera had already made a reputation for punishing Zeus's affairs, and this time was no different. She cursed Leto so that no land would allow her to give birth. Picture the desperation, a pregnant goddess wandering the world, rejected by every island and city because they were too afraid to defy Hera. Finally, Poseidon, Zeus's brother, took pity and guided Leto to a floating island called Delos. Because it wasn't anchored to the earth, it wasn't technically land, so the curse didn't apply. There, Leto gave birth to twins, Artemis first, and then Apollo. From the moment he was born, Apollo was destined for greatness. One of Apollo's most famous roles was as the god of prophecy. His temple at Delphi housed the oracle, a priestess who spoke his words in riddles. Kings, generals, and ordinary people alike traveled for days to seek guidance. Imagine the pressure. Your city is about to go to war. Your future depends on a single decision, and you're relying on Apollo's oracle to point you in the right direction. His influence shaped countless myths and decisions across Greece. But Apollo wasn't only about wisdom. He was also the god of music, poetry, and art. He carried a lyre, a stringed instrument, and was said to play it so beautifully that even the stones would move to listen. He symbolized harmony and creativity, the idea that beauty could heal and inspire just as much as weapons could harm. Yet Apollo wasn't all gentle light. He also carried a bow and arrows, and when angered, he could bring plagues and death. In the Iliad, he sent a plague to punish the Greeks when they dishonored his priest. His dual nature, healing and destruction, made him a reminder of how power can both give and take life. He was also fiercely competitive. Take the story of Marsyas, a satyr who challenged Apollo to a music contest. Marsyas played the flute beautifully, but Apollo, with his lyre, matched him note for note. Then Apollo raised the stakes. He played his instrument upside down while singing at the same time. Marsyas couldn't match him. As punishment for daring to compete with a god, Apollo flayed him alive. Brutal, yes, but it showed Apollo's merciless pride. Still, Apollo's reputation remained golden. He was the protector of shepherds, the bringer of sunlight, and a god who guided mortals with truth and beauty. His twin sister Artemis balanced him, ruling over the night, the moon, and the wild. Together, they represented harmony. Sun and moon, music and silence, civilization and wilderness. Apollo wasn't perfect. He could be arrogant, vengeful, and ruthless, but he was also inspiring, creative, and radiant. In him, the Greeks saw their ideal, a being who embodied both the brilliance of art and the discipline of order. He was the god you prayed to for healing, the one you looked to for guidance, and the one who reminded you that beauty and truth could light up even the darkest times. Artemis. Artemis was the goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, and wild animals. She also protected young women, childbirth, and the natural cycles of life. In Greek mythology, she was one of the most independent and untamed deities, a goddess who refused to be controlled by anyone, not even her father, Zeus. She was the twin sister of Apollo, and their births were tied together. Their mother, Leto, had been cursed by Hera, who was furious that Zeus had fathered children with her. Hera forbade any land to give Leto a place to give birth. After wandering in desperation, Leto finally found the floating island of Delos, which was not considered true land. There, Artemis was born first. According to some myths, she immediately helped deliver her brother Apollo. That detail alone set her apart. Artemis entered the world not as a helpless infant, but as a helper and protector. From the start, Artemis chose independence. She swore to remain a virgin forever, one of the three virgin goddesses alongside Athena and Hestia. Unlike Hera or Aphrodite, who were defined by marriage or love, Artemis rejected both. She lived freely, roaming mountains and forests, bow in hand, surrounded by her band of loyal nymphs. To her, the wild was home and freedom was sacred. Her role as the goddess of the hunt wasn't just about killing animals. She represented balance in nature, the predator and the prey, the cycle of life and death. Hunters prayed to her for success, but also for respect. In Artemis's world, hunting was not about cruelty, but about survival and harmony. She punished those who disrespected this balance. One of the most famous stories about her involves Actaeon, a hunter who stumbled across Artemis bathing in a secluded spring. For seeing her naked, she transformed him into a stag. His own hunting, dogs, confused and frenzied, turned on him and tore him apart. It was a harsh punishment, but it showed how fiercely Artemis protected her boundaries. She demanded respect, and those who violated her privacy or honor paid dearly. Artemis could also be nurturing. Though she never married or had children, she was worshipped as a protector of young girls and women in childbirth. In a way, this made her unique. She combined ferocity and compassion, independence and protection. Women prayed to her for safe deliveries, seeing her as a divine guardian through life's most vulnerable moments. Her loyalty to her companions was just as fierce. The nymphs who followed her swore to remain virgins like she did. When one of them, Callisto, was seduced by Zeus and became pregnant, Artemis was furious at what she saw as a betrayal. She transformed Callisto into a bear. Later, Callisto's son nearly killed her while hunting, but Zeus placed them both among the stars as the constellations Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. For Artemis, loyalty was absolute, and breaking it had consequences. Artemis's worship spread widely across Greece. Shrines to her existed in both cities and remote forests. She was one of the most honored deities because she represented things that touched every life, nature, protection, and the cycles of birth and death. Festivals in her honor often celebrated young girls coming of age, reflecting her role as a guardian of transitions. What makes Artemis so compelling is her defiance of expectations. She wasn't defined by marriage, romance, or domestic roles. She carved her own path, living in the wild, free from constraints. In a pantheon full of gods obsessed with power struggles and relationships, Artemis stood apart. She was a goddess who answered only to herself, embodying independence in its purest form. At the same time, she wasn't distant from human life. She was connected to the things people relied on most: the food they hunted, the cycles of nature, the safety of children, and the struggles of childbirth. She may have lived in the wilderness, but her influence was everywhere. Artemis reminds us that strength can take many forms. It can be the sharp aim of a huntress, the fierce defense of a protector, or the quiet independence of someone who refuses to be controlled. She was wild, free, and unyielding, a goddess who belonged to no one but herself. Dionysus, Wine trickling from a grapevine, drums pounding in the distance, dancers losing themselves in wild ecstasy. That's Dionysus. He wasn't just another Olympian god. He was chaos wrapped in joy, the living embodiment of letting go. Where Zeus ruled with order and thunder, Dionysus invited mortals and gods alike to surrender, to abandon restraint, and to taste freedom, even if only for a night. But behind the laughter and the festivals, his story began in tragedy. Dionysus's mother was Semele, a mortal princess loved by Zeus. Hera, furious as ever about her husband's affairs, devised a cruel plan. Disguising herself, she convinced Semele to ask Zeus to show his true divine form. Bound by oath, Zeus revealed himself in blazing glory, lightning, thunder, unbearable radiance. For a mortal, that sight was fatal. Semele was instantly consumed, yet even in death, she left behind a child. Zeus, desperate to save his unborn son, stitched the baby into his own thigh until it was time for birth, and so Dionysus became the twice-born god, first of Semele, then of Zeus. His unusual origin already marked him as different, both mortal and divine, both joy and sorrow. Hera wasn't done, though. She hunted him relentlessly, driving him far from Olympus. Dionysus wandered the earth, raised in secret by nymphs, hidden in forests and mountains. In his wandering, he discovered something that would define him forever: the grapevine. From grapes came wine, and from wine came release. He shared it with mortals, not just as a drink, but as liberation. Wine allowed them to laugh, to cry, to forget their troubles. In every sip was a little rebellion against life's hardships. But his gift had a price. Dionysus demanded recognition as a god, and when mortals or kings refused, he brought madness. One of the most chilling examples is the story of Pentheus, king of Thebes. Pentheus mocked Dionysus and tried to ban his worship. In response, Dionysus lured him into disguising himself as a woman to spy on the Bacchantes, female followers who worshipped in wild, frenzied rituals. The women, caught in their ecstasy, mistook Pentheus for a wild animal and tore him apart. His own mother, in her madness, joined the frenzy. It was a warning. Deny Dionysus, and chaos will consume you. His followers, the Maenads, danced in mountains, their hair unbound, their voices lifted in wild cries. To outsiders, it looked like madness. To them, it was liberation, stepping outside the cage of order into something primal and divine. It was dangerous, yes, but also intoxicating. Dionysus also became the patron of theatre. His festivals, the Dionysia, weren't just drunken parties. They were the birthplace of drama itself. Tragedy and comedy, the very art of storytelling, grew from his worship. Through theatre, mortals could explore the extremes of joy and suffering, echoing the contradictions Dionysus embodied. What makes him so fascinating is his duality. He brought joy, laughter, and creativity, but he also brought madness, destruction, and violence. He could save you from sorrow or drive you into frenzy. He was both healer and destroyer, both friend and enemy, and maybe that's why the Greeks both loved and feared him. Dionysus wasn't about control. He was about surrender, giving in to passion, to art, to the part of yourself that longs to break free. But surrender too much, and it could cost you everything. Even now, his spirit lives on wherever people gather to celebrate, to dance, to tell stories, to drink and forget their worries. Dionysus is the reminder that life isn't only about rules and order. Sometimes it's about joy, wildness, and the sweet danger of letting go. Hermes, Long before he became the god's official messenger, Hermes was already stirring up trouble. Picture this: a newborn god, barely a day old, sneaks out of his cradle, wanders off, and steals a herd of Apollo's cattle. To cover his tracks, he makes the cows walk backwards so no one can follow. When Apollo finally catches him, Hermes doesn't cry or beg. He charms. He talks his way out of punishment, invents the lyre from a tortoise shell, and gifts it to Apollo. By the end of the day, what began as theft turns into friendship. That's Hermes, trickster, negotiator, and charmer rolled into one. Hermes stood apart from the other Olympians because he could go anywhere. He wore winged sandals and a winged helmet, symbols of his speed and freedom. While Zeus ruled the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld, Hermes had no single domain, because he moved between them all. He was the god of travelers, merchants, thieves, and messengers. In a world full of rigid boundaries, Hermes was the one who crossed lines with ease. His role as messenger wasn't just about speed, it was about trust. When Zeus needed his word carried safely, Hermes delivered. When mortals prayed for guidance, Hermes answered. He was communication itself, the bridge between divine and human, order and chaos, life and death. One of his most important duties was guiding souls into the afterlife. When mortals died, Hermes didn't abandon them. He became their psychopomp, leading them gently to Hades' realm. Imagine the comfort of knowing that, at death, a god would take you by the hand and guide you through the unknown. It's a side of Hermes people don't often think about. Beyond the jokes and pranks, he had compassion. But of course, his trickster side never disappeared. Hermes loved bending rules. He was the patron of thieves for a reason, and countless stories describe him outsmarting gods and mortals alike. Yet his cleverness wasn't just selfish. He often used it to help heroes. Perseus, for example, couldn't have slain Medusa without Hermes' guidance and winged sandals. In myth after myth, Hermes wasn't the hero himself, but the helper who tipped the scales. He also carried the caduceus, a golden staff entwined with snakes. It represented balance, negotiation, and peace. To this day, it remains a symbol of trade and even medicine. It's proof of Hermes' enduring influence. Long after the myths faded, his imagery survived. What really made Hermes beloved was his personality. Other gods could be terrifying, distant, or cruel. Hermes felt approachable. He was witty, sly, and fun. The kind of god who might prank you, but would also protect you on a journey. Mortals prayed to him not out of fear, but out of affection. In Hermes, the Greeks saw something of themselves. He wasn't about brute power like Zeus, or fury like Ares, or wisdom like Athena. He was about adaptability. He could move between roles, bend rules, and talk his way out of anything. He embodied curiosity, freedom, and quick thinking, the qualities that helped humans survive in a complicated world. Hermes' stories remind us that cleverness is its own kind of strength. You don't always need thunderbolts or tridents to win. Sometimes all you need is wit, charm, and the courage to take a different path. That's why Hermes, more than many gods, still feels alive today. He's the spirit of adventure, the god of movement, and the trickster who shows us that life is meant to be traveled with speed, laughter, and a little mischief. Demeter. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, the one who made sure crops grew and the earth stayed fertile. To the Greeks, she wasn't some distant figure on a throne in the sky. She was life itself. Every stalk of wheat, every olive, every fruit on the vine existed because Demeter blessed the earth. Without her, nothing grew and people starved. That made her one of the most important goddesses in everyday life. But Demeter's story isn't only about abundance, it's also about loss, grief, and the deep love of a mother. Her daughter, Persephone, was the light of her life. Together, they symbolized the cycle of growth and renewal, the bond between mother and child, the earth and its fruits. And then Hades took her. One day, Persephone was picking flowers in a field when the ground split open. Hades, god of the underworld, burst forth in his chariot and dragged her down into his realm. To Persephone, it was sudden and terrifying. To Demeter, it was unbearable. Imagine searching for your child everywhere and finding only silence. Demeter wandered the earth, torches in hand, refusing to rest until she found her daughter. But while she searched, she abandoned her duties. The fields withered, the soil dried, and famine spread across the world. Mortals prayed and starved, their lives unraveling as Demeter's grief consumed her. The message was clear. Without her, the world could not survive. Eventually, Zeus intervened. Humanity was on the brink of extinction, and even he couldn't allow that. He ordered Hades to return Persephone. Hades agreed, but with one condition. Before she left, he offered her a pomegranate seed. Persephone ate it, not realizing that eating food from the underworld bound her to it. Because of that single act, she could never leave Hades' realm completely. A compromise was struck. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother and part with her husband in the underworld. When she returned to Demeter, the world flourished, spring and summer, full of life. But when she descended back to Hades, Demeter mourned, and the earth turned barren, fall and winter. This myth wasn't just a story. It explained the seasons, the cycle of planting and harvest. But it also spoke to something deeper, the inevitability of loss and renewal. Every parent eventually faces separation. Every joy comes with the shadow of sorrow. Demeter's grief wasn't just divine, it was profoundly human. She was honored in some of the most sacred rituals of ancient Greece, especially the Eleusinian mysteries, secret ceremonies that promised initiates hope for life after death. People saw her not only as the goddess of grain, but as a guide through the hardest parts of existence: loss, longing, and the promise of reunion. Demeter teaches us that growth comes with cycles. There are times of abundance and times of emptiness, but even in the darkest winters, renewal always comes. She embodies both the gifts of the harvest and the pain of losing what we love, reminding us that life itself is built on change. Hades. Hades was the god of the underworld, the ruler of the dead. To the Greeks, he wasn't evil, like later cultures imagined devils or demons. He was simply inevitable. Everyone, no matter how powerful or ordinary, eventually came under his rule. That alone made him one of the most feared gods. Unlike Zeus with his thunderbolts or Poseidon with his trident, Hades rarely left his domain. He stayed in the shadows, ruling quietly but firmly over the realm beneath the earth. His kingdom wasn't a fiery pit, but a vast, gloomy place where souls of the dead lived on. It was divided into regions: Elysium, a paradise for heroes, and the virtuous, the Asphodel Meadows, a grey plain for ordinary souls, and Tartarus, a deep pit of torment for criminals and enemies of the gods. At the gates of the underworld stood Cerberus, a massive three-headed dog who allowed souls in but never out. To cross into Hades' realm, souls needed passage from Charon, the ferryman. That's why the Greeks placed coins in the mouths or on the eyes of the dead, payment for the journey across the river Styx. Those who couldn't pay wandered the shores forever, unable to move on. Hades himself wasn't cruel. He was stern, fair, and unyielding. He didn't chase power above ground or meddle in mortal affairs. His job was to maintain balance, making sure the dead stayed in their place and the natural order continued. In a way, he was one of the most responsible gods. He didn't cause chaos, he contained it. Still, he was feared because death itself is feared. Mortals didn't pray to Hades the way they prayed to Zeus or Apollo. Instead, they avoided speaking his name, calling him Pluton instead, meaning the wealthy one, because all wealth, gold, silver, and gems, came from beneath the earth. He was wealthy not just in treasures, but in the countless souls that filled his realm. The most famous story tied to Hades is his abduction of Persephone. To him, it wasn't about cruelty. It was about desire. He wanted a queen. But to Demeter and Persephone, it was kidnapping. That tension, love for him, grief for her mother, defined Persephone's dual role as both maiden of spring and queen of the underworld. For Hades, it gave him a companion and softened his otherwise lonely role. What makes Hades fascinating is how misunderstood he often is. Later cultures painted him as a devil-like figure, but to the Greeks, he was necessary. Without Hades, the cycle of life and death would collapse. He wasn't an enemy. He was a reminder that death is part of existence. In some ways, Hades is the most relatable god of all. He doesn't demand worship, doesn't flaunt power, doesn't chase glory. He simply does his duty, no matter how thankless it is. And while people feared him, they also respected him for it. Hades shows us that not every kind of power is loud or flashy. Some power is quiet, steady, and absolute. He may not have ruled the skies or seas, but he ruled something no one could escape. And that made him, in his own way, the most powerful god of all, Hestia. Hestia was the goddess of the hearth, the fire that warmed homes and cooked meals. She wasn't a warrior, she wasn't flashy, and she didn't get caught up in the dramatic feuds of Olympus. Instead, she represented something simple, but essential: stability, family, and the comfort of home. In ancient Greece, every household had a hearth, and the fire there wasn't just practical, it was sacred. It was where families gathered, where meals were prepared, where warmth kept the cold at bay. For the Greeks, Hestia was that flame personified. She was the quiet presence that made a house feel like a home. Unlike many of the other Olympians, Hestia didn't have wild stories of battles, betrayals, or revenge. She was one of the three virgin goddesses, along with Athena and Artemis, and she lived a life of peace and devotion. When suitors like Apollo and Poseidon pursued her, she declined them both and swore an oath to remain unmarried forever. To her, independence mattered more than power or romance. But that didn't make her powerless. In fact, she was one of the most respected deities of all. Even Zeus, the king of the gods, honored her. She was given the first portion of every sacrifice, because no ritual was complete without her blessing. Whenever Greeks lit a fire, whether at home or in a public temple, it was considered a prayer to Hestia. She also had a role in uniting communities. In every city, there was a central hearth dedicated to her, often in a building called the Prytaneum. That fire was never allowed to go out. It symbolized the life of the city itself, a flame that represented unity and continuity. When new colonies were founded, settlers would carry embers from the mother city's hearth to light the new one, ensuring Hestia's presence linked them back to their origins. What makes Hestia stand out is how different she was from her siblings. While Hera raged with jealousy, Poseidon stirred the seas, and Zeus threw thunderbolts, Hestia stayed steady. She didn't chase power struggles or seek glory. She embodied constancy in a world of chaos. In myths, where the gods argued endlessly, she often stepped back, choosing peace over conflict. Some traditions even say she eventually gave up her seat on Olympus to Dionysus, preferring the quiet of the hearth to the endless drama of divine politics. But don't mistake her quietness for weakness. To the Greeks, her role was foundational. Without the hearth, there was no warmth, no food, no gathering place. Without Hestia, there was no home. She represented the core of human life, the place where survival met comfort, where community began. There's something deeply human about her presence. Think about it. Battles and storms may make exciting stories, but what sustains us day to day is the warmth of a home, the glow of a fire, the safety of family. Hestia embodied that truth. She wasn't about spectacle. She was about what truly matters when everything else is stripped away. In a way, Hestia reminds us that not all power is loud. Sometimes the most important forces are the quietest ones, the ones we hardly notice until they're gone. A hearth fire doesn't roar like thunder or crash like waves, but without it, life would be cold and dark. That's why Hestia, though often overlooked in myths, was one of the most revered in worship. She didn't need grand stories to prove her importance. Her power was steady, constant, and woven into the daily life of every Greek household. She was the goddess people carried with them every time they lit a flame, gathered at a table, or felt the comfort of home.